Spade a spade. Great to be here with you guys today. Lisa Leslie goes on ESPN First Take, and let's call a spade here. She absolutely drags every single GM in the league that voted not to start their franchise with Caitlin Clark. She dragged them all through the mud. She talked business and sense. She talked dollar signs. She said, y'all know we're in a money-making business, right? Y'all know we're in a industry that people want to get paid in, right?
Imagine walking into your boss's office, sitting down across from them and hearing the words, "You chose wrong and now you're going to pay for it." That is essentially what happened to every general manager in the WNBA when Lisa Leslie, one of the greatest players in the history of the sport, looked directly into the camera and delivered a verdict so sharp, so precise, and so brutally honest that the entire league felt the impact. This wasn't locker room gossip. This wasn't social media noise from an anonymous account hiding behind a keyboard. This was a living legend, a Hall of Famer, a woman who built the foundation of women's professional basketball with her own two hands, standing up and telling the people currently running the league that they are failing at the most basic level of their profession. And the reason she is so fired up comes down to one simple, controversial question that was posed to WNBA general managers before the season began. Which player would you most like to start a franchise with? Their answer was Paige Bueckers. Lisa Leslie's reaction to that answer was
1% from inside 5 feet and making more in that range than Stewie, A'ja Wilson, Angel Reese, but we're not surprised. That's her kryptonite. Within 5 feet, Angel Reese's kryptonite, and Brittany Griner. Caitlin Clark haters really do anything but watch basketball. She's averaging 5.5 field goal attempts per game within 5 feet, finishing at a 90.9% clip. Caitlin Clark, one of the most underrated parts of her game is the ability to get by a defender and finish in the paint.
Was immediate, unfiltered, and absolutely devastating. In her view, any general manager who would choose Paige Bueckers over Caitlin Clark when building a franchise from scratch isn't just making a basketball mistake. They are making a business mistake so catastrophic that it should cost them their jobs. She didn't sugarcoat it. She didn't soften the blow with diplomatic language. She simply said what everyone with eyes, a calculator, and basic business sense already knows. If you start your franchise with Paige Bueckers instead of Caitlin Clark, you are going to end up in the unemployment line. And you know what? She is absolutely right. Before we dig into why Leslie's comments carry so much weight, we need to understand the context of the survey itself. General managers across the WNBA were asked a straightforward question designed to gauge their thinking about franchise building in the modern era of women's basketball. The overwhelming response pointed to Paige Bueckers as the player they would most want at the center of a new organization. On the surface,
boardroom, Caitlin Clark. We're talking about top-selling jerseys since 2024. Since Caitlin Clark has entered the WNBA, you got Steph Curry 1, Caitlin Clark 2, LeBron James 3, Luka 4, and Victor Wembanyama 5. This is put out by Boardroom via Fanatics and NBA Store. Boardroom, we see you, Caitlin Clark, the same group of schmoes that said A'ja Wilson and Paige Bueckers were more marketable. This is why you have to look at these lists sometimes from people like Boardroom and just laugh at them. This is why you don't take their
that might seem like a reasonable answer to some people. Paige Bueckers is young, talented, marketable, and coming off an impressive college career at UConn. She has a following, she has skill, and she carries herself with the confidence of someone who believes she belongs at the highest level of the game. But here is the problem. The question wasn't asking which player has the most potential or which player might develop into something special over the next several years. The question was about starting a franchise, right now, in this moment, in a league that is sitting on the edge of a financial revolution that it has never seen before in its entire history. And in that context, choosing anyone other than Caitlin Clark is not just questionable. It is, as Lisa Leslie so colorfully put it, a one-way ticket to bagging groceries at your local supermarket.
Of schmoes that said A'ja Wilson and Paige Bueckers were more marketable. This is why you have to look at these lists sometimes from people like Boardroom and just laugh at them. This is why you don't take their opinions too seriously. You just have to laugh when they come out with bogus lists like A'ja Wilson, Paige Bueckers, Caitlin. What are we doing here? What are we talking about here? There's no conversation who the most marketable player is in the WNBA. You think Kathy was selling A'ja Wilson in these meetings?
Set aside basketball for a moment and talk about something that general managers are supposed to understand better than anyone else. Money, revenue, business sustainability. The cold, hard economic reality of running a professional sports franchise in the 21st century. In the entire history of the WNBA, there has never been a single player who forced teams to move their home games into larger arenas just to accommodate the demand from fans who wanted to see her play. Not one. The league has had incredible talent throughout its existence. It has had Hall of Famers, Olympic champions, and generational athletes who pushed the boundaries of what women's basketball could be. But none of them, not a single one, created the kind of gravitational pull that Caitlin Clark generates every single time.
Lisa Leslie on ESPN First Take. Let's take a listen to what Lisa Leslie had to say.
Before the season started, WNBA GM selected Paige Bueckers as a player they would most like to start a franchise with. What's your reaction to that?
Well, all those GMs probably gonna get fired because this is a money business, and money is about Caitlin Clark, who is the player who has made. Never in the history of the WNBA have we had a player force teams to get into larger arenas. I've never seen that happen. And so if you're the GM, you're obviously supposed to be bringing in money. That's revenue.
Right.
I'm going with Caitlin Clark. What you think, Steve?
Of course, I've been saying Caitlin Clark. Rising tide lifts all boats.
Rising tide lifts all boats.
She steps onto the court. 10,000-seat arenas, sold out weeks in advance. Ticket prices that rival those of established NBA franchises in major markets. Television ratings that have shattered records and forced the sports media landscape to pay attention to women's basketball in a way that simply did not exist before. This is not hype. This is not a media creation built on narratives and wishful thinking. These are documented, verifiable business outcomes that are directly tied to one player's presence in the league. Lisa Leslie understands something that too many of these general managers seem to be missing.
Having a down couple of games, expectations that she set for herself, expectations that we have for her because we think she's that great. Even those down couple of games, better than anything Paige Bueckers could do. Caitlin Clark's average right now, better than anything Paige Bueckers could muster. Completely healthy, no injury concerns whatsoever. No Paige Bueckers back brace. And Caitlin Clark is still putting up the numbers she's putting up. I believe I saw a stat. Caitlin Clark, the amount of time she had 18 points and 8 assists, she's number one in that category.
A general manager's primary job is not to win basketball arguments with fans on the internet. It is not to prove that they have a sophisticated eye for traditional scouting metrics. Their job is to build a profitable, sustainable franchise that generates revenue, fills seats, sells merchandise, and creates the kind of cultural footprint that attracts sponsors and television partners. By every single one of those measures, Caitlin Clark is the most valuable asset the WNBA has ever possessed. When Leslie says these GMs should be worried about their jobs, she is not being dramatic. She is connecting dots that any competent business executive should be able to connect on their own. If your primary responsibility is to bring in money and the biggest money-making opportunity in the history of your league is standing right in front of you, but you look past her and choose someone else, you are failing at your job. Period. Now let us talk about basketball, because the statistical comparison
She's putting up. I believe I saw a stat. Caitlin Clark, the amount of time she had 18 points and 8 assists, she's number one in that category. Already. In 54 games, Caitlin Clark is number one in that category. Passing Skylar Diggins, passing Diana Taurasi, passing Chelsea Gray, passing Becky Hammon. You name it, she passed them. She is going to go down as one of the best, if not the best. Scratch that. Sorry, my bad. She's going to go down as the best point guard to ever play the WNBA. That's without a doubt.
Comparison between Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers through the early portion of this season makes the general manager survey look not just questionable but genuinely embarrassing. Caitlin Clark is averaging 22 points per game. Paige Bueckers is averaging 17.5. That is a gap of 4.5 points per game, which is significant on its own, But the story gets even more lopsided when you look beyond scoring. In assists, Caitlin is averaging 8 per game compared to Paige's 3.5. That is more than double the playmaking output. In rebounds, Caitlin is pulling down 4.5 per game to Paige's 2.5. Even on the defensive end, where critics have historically tried to poke holes in Caitlin's game, she is outperforming her counterpart in both blocks and steals. When you lay these two statistical profiles side by side and remove the names attached to them, there is only one logical conclusion. One player is...
He hasn't talked to Caitlin Clark at all. Colin Cowherd. Colin Cowherd has a show. He hasn't talked to Caitlin Clark at all. Nick Wright. He has a show. He hasn't talked to Caitlin Clark at all. Shannon Sharp, Nightcap. They haven't talked to Caitlin Clark at all. Dan Dockage, an Indiana native. Someone who played basketball at Indiana University, Hoosierville. Had Lynn Dunn on his radio show. Caitlin Clark's rookie season. He doesn't talk to Caitlin Clark anymore. The only one still talking Caitlin Clark day in and day out from the...
is performing at a first-team all-WNBA level. The other is having what can fairly be described as a subpar and underachieving start to her professional career. The GMs who voted for Paige in that survey are not just watching their prediction age poorly. They are watching it fall apart in real time, game by game, quarter by quarter, possession by possession. Here is where the story takes a genuinely surprising turn that even Caitlin Clark's most enthusiastic supporters might not have anticipated. When most people think about what makes her special, they think about the logo threes, the deep pull-up jumpers from 30 feet that leave defenders looking foolish and crowds going absolutely wild. Her range is legendary. Her willingness to take and make shots from distances that most professionals would never even consider is a huge part of her identity and her brand. But right now, in the early stages of this WNBA season, Caitlin Clark is demonstrating something even more remarkable. She is shooting 90% inside of 5 feet. 90%. Let that number sit with you for a moment. We are talking about a 6-foot guard navigating through the paint against the tallest, strongest, most athletic defenders in women's professional basketball, and she is converting at a rate that is not just good. It is historically, statistically, almost incomprehensibly efficient. We are talking about a finishing percentage that surpasses what elite big women players are converting in that same area of the court. Players like Breena Stewart, players like a Ja Wilson. Players who were literally built to operate in the paint and have spent their entire careers developing their inside game. Compare that to a player like Angel Reese, who stands 6 feet 4 inches tall and physically dominates the space around the basket, yet is only converting 47% of her attempts inside of 5 feet. The player with the obvious physical advantage in that area of the court is actually finishing at less than half the rate of the player everyone assumed was a perimeter specialist. This is what separates good players from great ones. This is what separates franchise cornerstones from supporting pieces. Caitlin Clark is not just a three-point shooter who happens to occasionally drive to the basket. She's becoming the most complete offensive player in the league, and she is doing it while her outside shot is still finding its rhythm for the season. The thought of what her numbers will look like when that outside shot starts falling at her usual rate should genuinely frighten every defensive coordinator and every general manager who chose wrong in that survey. There is a conversation that exists in every professional sports league that nobody with institutional power ever wants to have publicly. It is the conversation about who is actually responsible for the money that everyone is getting paid. Lisa Leslie decided she was done waiting for someone else to have it. She said the quiet part out loud. Caitlin Clark is the reason the WNBA just secured a new collective bargaining agreement that includes dramatically increased salaries. She is the reason players are flying on chartered flights instead of commercial airlines. She is the reason sponsors are lined up around the block to attach their names to a league that, just a few years ago, was struggling to maintain consistent television coverage. Players who were making 5-figure salaries just a short time ago are now looking at million-dollar opportunities because of the economic wave that one player created by entering this league. For a general manager to stand up and say they would rather build around someone else is not just a basketball opinion. It is a statement that demonstrates a fundamental disconnect from the economic reality of the environment they are operating in. As Leslie framed it, you cannot take the money that a player generates for your entire organization and then turn around and say that player is not your first choice as a franchise cornerstone. That is not a strategy. That is a contradiction that will eventually cost you your position. The league is at a crossroads, and the people in charge of making decisions need to understand what kind of moment this is. Opportunities like the Caitlin Clark era do not come along regularly. They come along once in a generation, if that. The leagues and franchises that lean into those moments build lasting institutions. The ones that resist them or fail to recognize them end up as cautionary tales. Leslie is trying to make sure the WNBA ends up in the right category, and she is doing it by holding the decision-makers publicly accountable. There is another layer to this story that deserves serious attention, and it involves the tension between a generational talent and the system being asked to deploy her. The Indiana Fever's offense under head coach Stephanie White has been a source of genuine frustration for fans who want to see Caitlin Clark unleashed at full speed. When the Fever allow her to push the pace, run the fast break, and function as the primary engine of a high-tempo attack, she is genuinely the best player in the world on a basketball court. We have seen glimpses of it in the early portions of games where she takes over completely, making the right read every time, getting to her spots, distributing the ball with surgical precision, and making everyone around her better in ways that show up in the score as much as the stat sheet. But then something shifts. The offense slows down. The ball starts making its way around the perimeter, pass after pass after pass, sucking the energy out of the building and taking the ball out of the hands of the player who gives the team its best chance to succeed. It is a puzzle that coaches and front offices need to solve quickly, because the cost of mismanaging a talent like this is not just a few losses in the standings. It is a missed opportunity to build something historic. The Kelsey Mitchell situation is a perfect illustration of this dynamic. Mitchell is an explosive scorer who can go for big numbers on any given night. But she is also what you would describe as a ball stopper, a player whose first instinct when she catches the ball is to score rather than create. When a player like that exists in the same offense as the greatest playmaker in the league, you end up with a system that works against itself. 0 assists from a high-usage player in a single game is a symptom of a larger organizational problem that goes far beyond individual statistics. Lisa Leslie is not speaking out of spite or jealousy. She is not trying to diminish Paige Bueckers, who by every reasonable measure is a talented professional player with a legitimate future in this league. What Leslie is doing is something far more important. She is functioning as the conscience of women's basketball at a moment when that voice is desperately needed. The WNBA has spent decades fighting for relevance, for resources, for respect, and for the basic recognition that women's professional basketball deserves to exist on the same plane as any other major professional sport. That fight has been long and hard and filled with setbacks and frustrations. And now, right at this moment when everything the league has been working toward is finally becoming possible, the people in charge of making key decisions are demonstrating that they might not be equipped for the magnitude of the opportunity in front of them. Leslie's message to those executives is simple. Wake up. Look at the numbers. Look at the arenas. Look at the television ratings. Look at the sponsorship deals. Look at the collective bargaining agreement and the chartered flights and the million-dollar salaries, and ask yourself how all of that happened. And then make your decisions accordingly. If you can look at all of that evidence and still insist that you would rather build around a different player, then you are not just making a bad basketball decision. You are telling your ownership group, your fans, and the entire sports business world that you do not understand how to do your job. And in a league where the stakes have never been higher, that kind of incompetence simply cannot be tolerated. The most exciting and simultaneously most terrifying thing about what Caitlin Clark is doing right now is that this is not her ceiling, not even close. She is in the early stages of her professional career, still learning the speed of the game at this level, still calibrating the timing of her shots against WNBA-level defense, still building chemistry with teammates and developing an understanding of how the professional game flows differently from college basketball. The 90% finishing rate at the rim? That will stay, because it is built on technique, touch, and court vision, not athleticism alone. The elite playmaking. That will continue to grow as she develops deeper trust with her teammates and accumulates more hours of professional game experience. And when the outside shooting, her most devastating weapon, fully comes online at the volume and efficiency she has demonstrated throughout her career, the gap between Caitlin Clark and the rest of the league is going to become something that cannot be measured on a normal statistical scale. We are talking about a player who could realistically be averaging 28 to 30 points per game alongside 8 or 9 assists, while shooting at a historically efficient rate from virtually every area of the court. General managers who chose wrong in that survey are not just going to have to live with their decision this season. They are going to spend the next decade watching it haunt them every single time Indiana plays on national television. Lisa Leslie stepped up to a microphone and said what needed to be said. She did not soften it for comfort. She did not couch it in diplomatic language designed to protect anyone's feelings. She delivered the truth the way a champion delivers it, directly, confidently, and without apology. Caitlin Clark is the most important player in the history of the WNBA from a business perspective. She's the most statistically dominant player in the league right now on the court. She is the reason the economic landscape of women's professional basketball looks completely different today than it did just 2 years ago. And any general manager who cannot look at all of that and arrive at the obvious conclusion about who you build your franchise around is not qualified to be making those decisions. The unemployment line is not just a colorful metaphor. It is a preview of what happens to executives who ignore data, dismiss evidence, and let personal bias or outdated thinking drive decisions in an environment where the margin for error has never been smaller. The WNBA is a multi-million-dollar business now. It deserves leadership that thinks at a multi-million-dollar level. Caitlin Clark is number 22 for the Indiana Fever. She is the future of women's basketball, the engine of the league's economic revolution, and the most compelling argument for why this generation of women's basketball deserves every seat in every arena to be filled from the opening tip to the final buzzer. The front offices that figure that out will thrive. The ones that don't will have a lot of free time on their hands to reconsider their choices. Lisa Leslie already told them what comes next. Consider yourselves warned.